We're back on our top story tonight. Ashland-based Oregon Shakespeare Festival is conducting an emergency fundraising campaign, as we first reported on Newswatch 12 midday. And at the start of this newscast, OSF says it needs the money to complete its 2023 performance season. Newswatch 12's Jerry Howard has been tracking OSF's programming and leadership chances. He's in studio today to look at its financial situation. Jerry, what can you tell us?
Thank you. Today, Oregon Shakespeare Festival announced its The Show Must Go On, Save Our Season, Save OSF campaign to raise $2.5 million within 2 months. The prospect of OSF closing, whether for a season or for good, is very serious. So OSF says without the support funds, a funding gap could arrive by June. That could cause a season closure and layoffs. We took our questions right to OSF, and its artistic director, Nataki Garrett, joins us. She joins Newswatch 12 now to discuss OSF's financial situation and how it affects the theater company's future. And so thank you, Nataki.
Thanks for having me.
Sounds like it takes a process to get in this situation. It'll take a process to get out. Is that an overall generalization that's accurate?
Usually a recovery period takes longer than the reason why you needed to recover in the first place. And that's exactly what OSF is experiencing post-pandemic. It's exactly what the entire theater industry is experiencing post-pandemic. I'm the first of quite a few theaters. Actually, OSF is not the first of a number of theaters across the country to announce emergency fundraising campaigns to help us save our seasons and save our theaters.
Well, and regarding that campaign, we've used the number $2.5 million tonight, which is accurate, but there's actually a kind of an earlier deadline in there, right? That $1.5 million needs to be raised in essentially 50 days by June, or a decision will be made then. Is that right?
That is correct. We're actually really optimistic that that first 1.5 will be raised relatively quickly. We had some prospects already moving towards the support for OSF. It's really to galvanize the greater, community, local community, but also across the country and the world to get people focused on what nonprofit theaters really do need in order to be able to survive the crises that are arising post-pandemic. And so while we do really need all of the money, we started off with a little bit of resource from some of our board members who decided to double their gives this year, just to make sure that we had something to start with.
Sure. And that $2.5 million, how far does that go toward funding this season? What is the total cost to run the 2023 projection?
Yeah, so 2023 is right now running at about $37 million. Just to sort of give the viewers an understanding, historically, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival that I came to was a $44 million organization. And so, of course, you can imagine what it means to do the same kind of work and to operate a repertory theater with such a tight and constrained budget. It just takes a lot more money to run a repertory theater than a theater that does it one at a time. But that gap we started with the beginning of the year, we came in as like a $40 million, and then over the course of the year we have just sort of cut down and cut down and cut down internally to be able to save the resources we need to be able to make sure that this season could go. But we also know that if we can figure out, how to raise the resources to make sure that this season goes, that there's the opportunity, which is what we really want, is to make sure that we can make it to our 90th anniversary, which is in 2025, and then beyond that.
And those long-term goals are, I think the community, of course, would want to reach, but more, near term, the prospect of a June funding gap puts a possible closing decision right within about 60 days. So how urgent is this funding need?
The funding need is very urgent. We've been in communication with our board, for the last 4 months, just really trying to figure out how we were going to close this gap. The need is actually very urgent. And June is the date because we're experiencing a cash flow crisis. We have some resource that's coming in later on in the year. We have ticket sales for later in the year for after June. But when you're in a cash flow crisis like the one that we're in, and you don't have access to, lines of credit or other ways in which you sort of float through these otherwise would be a little less impactful emergencies, you're sort of in this. You're stuck in this space where you just don't have enough cash to get through a tiny period of time. If we could just pulled the dates together, we would be in a lot better shape. But we do need the cash in order to make sure that we can make it through.
I think most people can understand a little stopgap there, but in that regard, this financial gap is too. It's not like we're really saying it could run out of money in June. OSF could run out of money, and if that's the case, is $2.5 million a bit of a financial stopgap, or is it adequate to sustain the balance of the season?
So the show must go on. Save Our Season, Save OSF is a grassroots campaign with the goal to be able to successfully complete the 2023 season. We need to raise 1.5 by June in order to be able to make it through the peak summer expense period. And if we can make it through that peak summer expense period, then there's this very great chance that we'll be able to make it through the rest of the season. So if we should announce a cancellation of any of our shows or performances, we'll offer our patrons a multitude of ticket options, including refunds, which has been customary in the past for closures and cancellations. And we've decided that we need to put the planning for 2024 on hold at this time, just so that we're being conservative in our estimates about how we endeavor forward. So again, we need to raise the money for this year, for this season, but it's specifically for this cash flow gap that we have in the middle of our year, at the top of our season, when we have the most number of people coming, the most number of patrons coming to OSF. And if we can make it through that time, perhaps we can make it all the way through to the end of the scheduled season, which is October 15th, knowing that we need to save the resources in 2024 and really kind of regroup the way that we're doing the work here. At the beginning of the year, we announced the revitalization and restructuring campaign. Part of that is it's now sort of given us the opportunity to understand where we are as an organization and what we need to be focused on in order to ensure that we can make it to our 90th year and beyond.
So would that be accurate to say if this money doesn't come through that OSF could run out of money in June?
Yeah, it is accurate to say that if we don't raise the money in time, we will not have enough cash to make it through our peak season, which is in June. And so right now, the issue is about cash. When you have a cash gap and you don't have a way to bridge that gap, you have to sort of ask people to help you to bridge that gap. That's the situation that we're in. We do have pledges and other resources coming in after that gap. But of course, that's the gap that we're focused on right now, because that's the gap that we have to get through.
Well, and at the outset we said it takes a process to get here. Some of that process, I suppose, goes back before you, and there have been some leadership changes before, which means direction changes, and apparently those changes got OSF to this situation. So what sort of accountability do previous executive directors have?
It's an interesting question, because it's like we can go all the way back to Angus Bomer and say, well, what did you do to make sure that we could be here now? I feel like the people who are doing the work at the time are doing their best work with the best understanding of what's necessary at the time. The endeavor here at OSF has always been a mix of Shakespeare plays and new plays. And that's something that time over and over in artistic directors and executive directors have inherited. We've had years where the audiences were really excited about all of the mix of plays. We've had years where they weren't. That's normal for every single theater under the sun. And so right now, I would actually attribute the bulk of our issues to the pandemic, the closure, and the acceleration of something that had been happening well before I got here, which is you have a sort of shift in the way that audience behavior, you can't really rely on the way that audience behavior had begun to shift before the pandemic. And so whatever that was accelerated through the pandemic, and here we are now. And so my sister theaters down in San Francisco, the ones in Seattle, are all saying the same exact thing. Unless all of our audiences come back, including those who have been historically marginalized out of our theaters, and until everybody decides that coming into a theater is really important post-pandemic, all of the theaters in the country are having the same experience. And so I would rather not focus on an individual here and there. I think I inherited the calling. I was told by my predecessors what was important here. I followed that call to the best of my ability, especially because right in the middle of the beginning of my tenure was a pandemic. And so and whoever comes behind me will also follow that call. And the hope is that, we'll galvanize the audience, the traditional audience that loves OSF and has loved it since before I was even born. We will galvanize their children and grandchildren and a whole group of people who are not connected to OSF to come, because it's a very important part of Ashland and the state of Oregon, and it is extremely important to the theater field as a whole.
Well, and you're right. And picking up on that, the title for the campaign, the emergency campaign, which we'll hope is brief and successful. The show must go on. Save our season. Save OSF. That sounds positive but ominous. What is the likely long-term effect if money doesn't get raised this season beyond 2023? What's the outlook?
What's interesting about this theater, and one of the reasons why I came here, is because the history here is that it's usually out of crisis that OSF tends to emerge. If you imagine, Bomer started this theater in the 30s, and then there was a world war, and then he restarted it. And every single time the endeavor has been an experiment, looking to see if this is what the people want. I remember reading that Angus Bomer called this the people's theater. So the future of this theater is in the people's hands, and the people want it to remain. The people will make sure it remains, no matter what. So the show must go on is an embedded part of the industry that I come from. We say that all the time. No matter what, the show must go on. Save our season, because we're the season that we're in, and save OSF because history proves that the people who love OSF do what it takes to make sure that it still exists for generations of patrons to come.
Nataki, you're such a terrific diplomat and ambassador for OSF. And I know you said, well, you wouldn't pick on anyone individually, but that's what journalists do. But I won't pick on individuals, but I will maybe pick on a group, if I may. And that is a board of directors. That's what a board of directors is to do, right? Is to direct and navigate an organization for success and prosperity and avoid risks. And now we're looking at the prospect of OSF being out of cash in June. Looking back, not trying to put you on a hot seat, but organizationally, can we say that there's something where the board missed an opportunity, a step, and maybe it gets back to one of your answers before about it's a different audience maybe now, and maybe the board hasn't figured it out or seen the way to navigate into the future?
Again, when I'm looking at a group of volunteers who elect their time and energy and resource to govern an organization like this, and their responsibility is based on the information that they have at the time. I can say that everybody who is here to support OSF is supporting OSF with the intention to make sure that it not only survives. I think survival has been at the center of my time here. I got here, crisis started. I'm in the middle of crisis now. That's what it's always been. I have board members who've been here since before I've gotten here, and they have been through crisis, and they have helped us get through those crises, and they understand what's necessary in order for OSF to continue. And so I actually feel like I'm indebted to this board for the work that they've done to make sure that we can move through this time. Last year, the 2022 season, that endeavor was a huge undertaking and a great risk. How many shows do you program? Do you program enough because you feel like everybody's coming back? Do you program less because you don't know who's coming? What are the decisions that you make? And coming in from a pandemic closure, this is only the second closure that the organization has ever experienced since Angus Bomer. So coming back, and there were no notes, by the way, a great person wrote a wonderful book, but not a lot of notes about how to come back. And you can't actually write that book because this pandemic closure is completely different than coming back from the Great Depression. And so I'm excited about the work that the board is endeavoring to do, to take on some of the responsibilities of the organization, to help push us forward, to make sure that this organization moves past this time. And I know that they are taking great responsibility for our community contacts and our debts and our all the ways in which you are supposed to. Our board is endeavoring to ensure the future of this organization.
Well, Nataki, I'll sneak in one more question, if I may, and that is, there was a meeting today, correct, involving this decision and Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Who was at that meeting, and what happened there? What was said?
It was a company meeting. And so, what we're centering here at OSF is care. I believe that if you center the people who do the work, that they will also center you. And because we were asking our company members to take on some of the work of The Show Must Go On by continuing to endeavor through this season with the knowledge that at some point, if we're not successful, that they are the ones who are going to suffer. Their jobs are at stake. Their lives and livelihoods will shift. And so what we wanted to make sure, there's a lot of, I don't know what this is, but there's something here that I haven't experienced in any other theater that I've connected to. But there's a lot of fodder for gossip, and that's really deadly in a time when people are very reliant on the work that we do at OSF. And so we wanted to make sure that we held our company as community. We wanted to make sure that they had clarity about what was happening. And so we gave them all the information that we have so that we can all make an informed decision about how we move forward together.
Well, Nataki Garrett, thank you for making time to speak with Newswatch 12 and our viewers today about what's happening at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Again, a bit of a recap. Oregon Shakespeare Festival announced today a $2.5 million emergency campaign that it says it needs to reach really in the next 50 days to make a decision in June about completion of the 2023 Oregon Shakespeare Festival season. Thank you, Nataki, for joining us. I appreciate your time and thoughts shared with us today.
Thank you very much. And the show must go on.